Today I wanted to share with you how I consistently catch swarms each year. Many people like to call these boxes that we put out swarm traps or bait hives. I prefer to call them a swarm box because you're not actually trapping the bees. If those bees do not want to move into that box, they will not. I've always found that catching a swarm of bees has been amazingly fascinating. Understanding how to catch a swarm of bees will round you out as a beekeeper and keep you from becoming a bee loser. I want to talk about some legal issues when you go to catch a swarm. Different states have different rules, but the overall flavor to this is this. If someone lost a swarm and they're in pursuit of that swarm and it's within eyesight of them, while they pursue that swarm, it is still legally theirs in a lot of states. If that swarm goes on to someone else's land and it is caught by you maybe, or someone else, that swarm is up for grabs and the ownership transfers to that new person. You still, however, have to obey the state laws around posted property and private property, so I would encourage you to check out those laws in your state. I'd like to, for this video, explain what a swarm is. Swarming is how a colony of bees reproduces other colonies of bees. Primary swarms are generally the larger swarms, and they're the first swarms that leave that colony that's accompanied by the original queen or the old queen in that colony. Secondary swarms issue after that primary swarm and usually are smaller. Some of the time, that secondary swarm or that after swarm can contain several different virgin queens or queens that just got mated. In the spring of the year is generally when the primary swarms happen in most hives if they're going to swarm. There are cases when late spring or early summer, these swarms will continue to be a possibility, and even through the fall. But generally speaking, spring is the time when you catch swarms. I have fond memories of catching swarms with my dad when we would work as bees. I've now, at this point, caught swarms in several different states, including most of the New England states and New York State, South Carolina, and Florida. There's a common misconception when it comes to swarms. Some people believe that there's always a layover spot when that swarm issues. I've seen it firsthand where a swarm will issue out of a given box of bees and then end up in yet another box. So that idea or that information that you may have consumed where that swarm leaves that box, goes to a temporary place, and then finds their permanent home, while it's common to see that, it isn't always the case. I encourage everyone that's watching this to consider building one of these swarm boxes like we build it, and put it in your apiary so that you don't have loss in the spring of the year. In addition to having one of these swarm boxes in your own apiary, if you build one of these boxes and put it in a nice location, you're very likely to catch a swarm over time. I don't consider them freebies because it's kind of expensive actually to be driving around checking on your swarm boxes. But it's a very enjoyable, amazing spectacle of nature. The tools that you're going to need are a screw gun that I recommend not substituting for a hammer or nails. I like to use a 3/4 inch drill bit. I like to use a pruning saw. Sometimes I use a step ladder. I use snips to cut your screening. I always have a Hive Tool on me. Here's a list of materials that I'm going to be using today. I like to use old bee equipment when catching swarms. I like an old, experienced 10-frame Langstroth deep box, an experienced or used cover, and an experienced or used bottom board. While you could use new equipment, I believe wholeheartedly that old equipment is quite superior to a new piece of plywood, for example. The smell is enticing as they enter that old equipment. They know another colony has lived in there. It's like a prefab housing for them. New equipment does not measure up, in my opinion. I like to use a 10-frame deep box in order to catch swarms because it'll accommodate even the most massive swarms that you run into. I also believe that you can catch a swarm in a smaller box. I don't believe that the size or the volume of that box is as important as people make it out to be. A small nucleus colony box, when it has been used, is quite a bit more enticing than a 10 frame box that hasn't been used. I like to use 3 old combs in that box. One of them is going to have some honey in it, and a lot of times it'll have some pollen. The comb next to that, I like to use an empty, dry brood comb that is old. And then adjacent to that, I like to use an empty comb that has a starter strip in it. There's a misconception that we shouldn't put a comb of honey inside of our swarm box. That's a lot of garbage. I like when these bees start to become familiar with this swarm box by robbing out that frame of honey. Scout bees will rob it out on days when there's no nectar being produced. I've seen stacks of empty equipment get completely ignored by swarms, and the swarms will prefer a box that has some old honey in it. It's an amazing offering that allows those scout bees to become familiar with that swarm box. I like to use a piece of painter's cloth that's the same size as the lid. You'll also need some 1/8 inch hardware cloth. 1/4 inch hardware cloth will not contain your bees. You'll need a handful of screws. I like to use lemongrass oil. I do not believe that you need to buy Swarm Commander. I don't think it gives you any more benefit. Lemongrass oil is very reliably available in most drugstores and is less expensive than Swarm Commander. You're going to need some way to attach this box to a tree. Today I'm going to show you how to do that with a simple foot peg that you can find at Tractor Supply or at Walmart where the deer hunters hang out. If you're going to use a foot peg, get a cork that's the same size as that drill bit. If you don't want to wind a foot peg into a tree, you can use a tie-down strap or some other way to affix this box to the tree. I like to scorch and scrape the old boxes so that we can minimize the transfer of some of the diseases. First thing you're going to do is drill a hole in the bottom board for the foot peg. I'm a big fan of having ventilation in these swarm boxes. If your bottom board does not have any holes in it, I recommend that you drill some holes in it and screen them off. Next, we screw the bottom board to the bottom of that 10 frame deep box. Next, we're going to put the frames inside of this 10 frame box. I like that honey frame with some pollen on it on the outside wall. Then a dry brood comb next to that, and then a frame that has a starter strip on it adjacent to that. The reason I set it up that way is that when you catch a swarm, you want to be able to check on the integrity of the pattern of brood that queen is laying. That empty frame with a starter strip in it allows your bees to build some comb. When they're swarming, they build comb like crazy. I don't want the bees to build burr comb on the brood comb. That way it allows me to check that brood comb when I catch that swarm. I like to screw that last frame down to the box so that they don't slop around inside of there during transport. You'll notice I don't tie down or screw down the bottom of that frame. I like to use a medium frame with that starter strip in there so that when they build that first burr comb down, it'll have some structure to it so it doesn't swamp around in there when you go to transport that swarm. I like you to consider making sure that the entrance is opposite of where the combs are and that it's also shielded from the rain. I like to have the frames on the bottom side of that box as it hangs in that tree diagonally. I like to have the entrance on the upper side of that so that when a scout bee comes into that box, it can fly around a little bit and then find those combs. The end of the bottom board is then screened over, and then that screen is peeled back for an entrance. This peeled back piece of screen is there so that we can close it easily when we go to remove that swarm from the tree. It's crucial, in my opinion, to have one entrance because that's where you're going to place your lemongrass oil, and that's where we want to know that the bees are entering and exiting so that you can smoke them at that one entrance before you take them down out of the tree. Lemongrass oil is an important part to catching a swarm of bees, in my opinion. Lemongrass oil mimics a Nasanov pheromone that scout bees give off when they find a new home location. I like to put that lemongrass on a cotton material inside the box near the entrance so that it doesn't get rained on and lose its potency. Next, you put your painter's cloth on top of that box and then your lid. The painter's cloth is essential because when you catch your swarm and you set it down on the ground at a new location, you want to be able to get inside of that box without destroying the comb that they've built. On a warm day, it's very simple to just tear that painter's cloth off once those bees have started building that structure inside. I find that painter's cloth is the perfect material to use in this instance. I've attempted to use other materials in lieu of this painter's cloth, but it's not as great. If you have a piece of painter's cloth that has been used as a lid before, you'll notice when I catch a swarm that those stripes will be actually where they start to build their burr comb. Next, we're going to start to look for a location to hang your swarm box. I like to look for trees along the edge or in the center of a field. The earliest blooming trees and vegetation coincide with swarm season. So I like to have your swarm box put in a location that is also laden with early blooming plants and trees, because your bees start to get familiar with that location and then they find your swarm box and then they tend to move in there during your first blooming opportunities. When looking for a swarm box location, I like to consider the vegetation and the trees that are in that area. I'm looking for bloom that's going to happen sequentially. And so in New England, I like to find a lone apple tree in the middle of a field. That lone apple tree a lot of times will have vegetation growing around the base of it that's going to come into bloom after the apple tree. So for instance, here in New England, you'll find an apple tree that's going to bloom in May. That honeysuckle that's growing around underneath of it's also going to start to bloom in the latter part of May and into June. That's a long bloom. And so your scout bees are going to start to hit that bloom and they're going to get familiar with that apple tree, that honeysuckle, maybe that multifloral rose bush that's around that. And that'll all start to promote activity in and around that swarm box. Ideally, a location with early or midday sun with some water source nearby. I like an area that does not have bare pressure, and I like an area that you can access with your pickup truck. I also prefer an area that has a long history of having honeybees. The height of the box in the tree isn't as important as a lot of people make it out to be. I believe the tree will dictate where that box should be hung. Once you've hung your swarm box, now all you have to do is wait. Spring and early summer are the most common times to catch swarms, but you can continue to catch swarms into the fall. I recommend that you keep an eye on this swarm box and check on it at least weekly. That allows you to know roughly when you pick up a new colony of bees so that it doesn't grow like crazy and get cramped and swarm yet again. And just before a swarm of bees moves into it, you'll notice a bunch of scout bees showing up regularly. Those scout bees will be looking for a new home, and then soon after, some of the time, a colony of bees will move in there. You'll know when a colony of bees moves in there, there's no mistake in it. You'll start to notice bees showing up at the entrance with pollen on their legs, a sure indicator that you have a queen in the box that's starting to lay up brood. Before you catch your swarm of bees, I recommend that you find a premium location at least 3 miles away from where you caught your swarm. When you catch your swarm of bees, this is how I recommend you handle that. In order to catch your field force, your bees that are out in the field, I recommend that you either move them in the rain or in the evening in the last light. Transporting bees at night can be a little bit dicey in that if they leak out of that box, they will easily crawl around and like to sting you as soon as they touch your skin. Keep an eye out for entrances that may have opened up on that box. Some of the time they'll use the entrance where the footpeg is attaching to the tree. Some of the time they'll chew out a new entrance. So you want to make sure that you smoke all of those entrances and then screen off places where they're entering and exiting. When you take that box down out of the tree, don't forget to put that cork in that hole in the back. And you should be able to easily transport those bees to their new location. I don't recommend that you make any stops as you're transporting your bees. I do not recommend that you transport your bees in your car. Transporting bees in a car has been done. People get stung while they're driving. Some of the time that causes some hazards in traffic. It's not worth it. Get a pickup truck, throw them in the back of the pickup truck, and move them to their new location. After a few days, I recommend you check on those bees. You can wait for a warm day and you can simply tear that painter's cloth off. You'll see your original combs over there on that one side. The middle frame has the comb where they're going to have new brood in it. You can easily take that frame out and inspect the brood pattern. That'll give you information on the viability of that queen. At that point, you can also assess and see if they need more room. If they need more room, you can simply put on a box on top of that 10-frame box that you have. I like to feed that new swarm of bees sugar syrup 1-to-1 ratio as soon as I catch them. This allows that swarm to start to build up quickly, and it allows that queen to kind of catch up with other colonies that are already established in your area, especially when you start to catch swarms in the early part of the summer. It starts to get a little bit too late for them to build up fast enough to get through winter. If you don't feed them sugar syrup and get them kind of super revved for the next season, they may not make it through this next winter. I highly recommend that you do not cut out the burr comb that they've built. It takes a lot of energy and resources for a new swarm to build burr comb. They're doing that in a way that's going to allow them to live and get through their first winter. As that colony grows, they'll fill out those boxes above the original box. That colony, as it goes into winter, will start to use those upper boxes to store honey, and it will be a place where the colony moves up to as it overwinters. They'll abandon that lower box. And so in the next spring, you can dislocate that lower swarm box, cut out that comb if you need to, and then reuse that. Catching swarms is an important skill to have as a beekeeper. I hope this video helped you in that regard. Swarming honeybees is a deep and complex topic. I've broken this down so that in this video, we've showed you how to use a swarm box in order to catch a swarm. We will also be doing videos on how to hive a swarm and how to prevent swarming from happening in your apiary. Thank you for watching, and please follow us for more in-depth educational videos on beekeeping.